Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura B. Floss 2. Welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. So we're going to continue our journey on making our ornament display Christmas tree quilt. Today I'm just going to show you a few things that I'm going to do just to applique those shapes together. So the first step in that, if you haven't done the interfacing applique technique before, the last video you saw me construct the background squares and get those together. In the video before that, you were watching me match up the fabrics to the different shapes and then divide them out to the different fabrics and stack them all up in my project box. So let me grab that project box and I'll show you what I'm doing today. Okay, so we have our work cut out for us. I have a bunch of shapes in here that are going to need sewn together with their interfacing. So, there are a couple different ways that we could do this. We could look at our pattern, which would be a great idea actually. We can look at our pattern and decide what we need to do first to start constructing our tree on down the way. Or we could just get all of our shapes sewn with the interfacing and turn them out as we go. Or we could get all our shapes sewn and turn them all out and be ready and put the entire background up on the design wall and pin everything in place and then start appliquing. And I really think I'm going to go with option 3. So this video, I'm just going to show you very briefly on the technique to do the interfacing applique shapes. And so I'll show you the sewing process, the flipping process, and the pressing process. And then this will be a great tutorial that you can use on any quilt that you're using the interfacing technique for your applique. All right, so let me grab one of these fabrics and get sewing. All right, so we're going to be sewing. I did take one of the fabric pieces out of my box, and it has the interfacing pieces pinned to it. And I'm just going to sew these onto the fabric and then cut them out and then flip them out and press them so you can see this process. All right, so let me get my sewing machine set up and I will have you join me down here. For those of you who may have not watched any of my previous videos, let me just give you a little rundown on my machine. I'm using a Juki DX7. When I am doing my interfacing stitching for my applique, I use a stitch length of 2.0 or 1.8. It's just a straight stitch. It's just a very small straight stitch because I just want to make sure that that seam is not going to give when I go to turn these shapes out. Now these shapes, when we were working with them on the design wall, you may remember that I had I had like 3 segments of interfacing hanging that I traced onto. So actually all 3 of these pieces have that interfacing overlap, and so I'm just going to make sure they're pinned in place correctly and then just start sewing them together. Now the other thing that I do want to make sure is just that none of this interfacing is overlapping any of the other areas. So we're just going to start with this one piece here and start our stitching. I'm going to move this over just a little bit because I noticed that that other large piece is actually on the selvage on the other end, and that's not ideal. So we are going to move this one down just a smidge so we can start here and give that one a little more room. We'll move it. This is a pretty simple process. You're just going to follow your lines. Now, if you used a Sharpie like I did, you may want to stitch inside that line a little bit, just so you can kind of clip some of that Sharpie marker off. I'm not going to worry about it though, to be quite honest. This is going to be a wall hanging. It's not going to be washed. And that Sharpie is permanent. All my fabrics are dark, so it's not going to show through. And I'm actually contemplating what color of thread I'm going to use to applique my shapes onto the background fabric. I may end up going with a dark brown or a black color to applicate all those shapes onto, rather than trying to find multiple greens to match my fabrics. All right, when you get all the way around your shape, you do want to go ahead and stitch over, you know, an inch, inch and a half, and instead of doing a back stitch there, that double stitching line is what's going to keep my shape from unraveling when I go to turn it. Now, one thing I love about this technique is just that you get a finished edge without having to do like the needle turn applique. I'm just not really good at needle turn applique. I'm sure that practice makes perfect, and that if I, you know, tried it more than just once, then I would probably be better at it. But, you know, I really enjoy machine applique, and that's just kind of where I focused my time and energy and building my knowledge. I mentioned in another video one time that it takes approximately 10 years and or 10,000 hours to become proficient at any given task. And that's, you know, been proven time and time again in the science world and psychology, it really is the truth. So, you know, cut yourself some slack, don't get frustrated, and I know that's so much easier said than done. But if this is your first time doing some applique, just remember that, you know, it's going to get easier the more you do it. And if it's something that interests you, then it probably is going to be worth your time and energy to sharpen that skill. All right, we have one more shape left on this piece of fabric, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut them out and turn them out so you can see how that process works. I'm very happy that I caught that I was able to not have that piece on the selvage. That would not have been ideal. And now this one needs to line up. Let's see here. I believe there it is. It's the only thing, when I had those Pellon pieces overlapping, some of my shapes, you know, they were a little funky to get them lined back up. I'll freely admit that some of my tracing may not have been spot on. It could have been a little off. I definitely know that, you know, some of my curves may not have been quite as smooth as I would have liked them to be, but I can smooth that out when I'm sewing. Now, if working with this big piece of fabric is cumbersome to you, you can obviously cut this fabric down. I could have rough cut this shape out and sewn it onto a much smaller piece of fabric. It's really just what's most comfortable for you. All right, so now we have these three pieces sewn onto our fabric, and let me just go ahead and cut these out. And I'm just going to keep the camera rolling as I do that. Now, since we sewed this on to the right side of the fabric, the shape is not going to mirror when I cut it out. It's going to look just like this because the interfacing will flip to the back and leave our fabric on the front. Now, if you have any areas like I do on this shape where it's a concave area, you do definitely want to clip that curve just to ease that fabric around when you go to turn it. And I know some people clip a lot closer or further apart than I do. It's just whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you feel is necessary. The other thing on this is this little tip here. I am going to kind of slice that off a little bit and trim it down just so when I go to turn that shape out, that little point will be easier to get a point. All right, now let's cut this next shape out. I am getting really excited about this project, you guys. This is, it's going to start coming together faster than we think. At least I hope so. I'm going to go ahead and cut this, kind of rough cut that, just to get some of that weight from that other shape pulling on my piece off of it. And we have a big curve here, so make sure you, if you're doing something with big curves like that, make sure you clip them. You'll notice I kind of cut that a little close over there, so we'll be careful when we're turning it out. Just be careful not to cut through your seam. That's 2 of the pieces. Now, since I did label all of my pieces with a number that does coordinate with the pattern that I drew, or I printed out and drew on, you want to make sure that you write that number when you go to flip it. Write that number on the opposite side, because you're going to lose that information otherwise. That would not be ideal. All that work for nothing. And I'm just going to write those with a pencil. If you have maybe a micron pen or something like that that you want to use, that would be fine too. You could, you could print out little labels and label all of them as well. Okay, so this one is number 56. And I am going to go ahead and kind of cut this interfacing a little bit just so I have a bigger space to grab and turn. And let me turn you around a little bit here so we have a better angle. Okay, so I'm just going to basically stick my fingers in there and push that out. Kind of pull it a little bit so it comes out. That's one side of the shape. Now this other side could be tricky, but we have a trick for this. Let me go grab it. I talked about this tool in one of the Bloom Quilt sew-alongs, and I think it's going to come in handy again. So if you haven't found your Turn It All tool, you may want to. I think we'll go ahead and use the big one. Actually, maybe not. What to do, what to do? Which one do I want to use? Let's use the medium one. Okay, and we're going to stick this inside here. And then we're going to poke that through just a little ways, because we can't completely use it the way it's intended, but we can most of the way. All right, so that turned this out. And let's get our 2-point turner. And smooth this end of the shape. And then you'll notice that it does not go all the way up inside of here, but I can bring this down to the point. You want to be careful, don't put too much pressure there because you could rip your interfacing and that would ruin all of your finished edges. Now if you have a chopstick, which I do, or a hemostat, you could use that. I also have this little metal rod that I can stick up in there to poke that. And this little metal rod is in with the turn-it-all tool as well, actually. And just poke that fabric out to get that point. All right. Now we do have a little bulk in here, and we may trim that out once it's pressed. But I'm going to leave it just like this until I get it pressed. Stretch that little curve a little bit. Make sure this is pushed out. All right. And once this is pressed, all that interfacing will stay underneath. You won't see it anymore. But here is the first piece of our tree. Pretty fun. All right, now that was number 56. I don't know if you remember that, but I do. So we want to make sure that we write that on the outside of this interfacing. All right, so now I'm going to lay this over on my ironing board, and we're going to turn the other two shapes out. You'll notice I'm using quite a few different types of tools here. It's really kind of what works for you. Kind of stretching that a little bit in that curve because it is a pretty good curve, just to kind of relax that those fibers in the fabric a little bit. All right, so here is our last piece for this fabric. I'm going to write the number on the back of this, and then we'll meet up at the ironing board. All right, just for pressing these shapes, we're just going to take a hot iron And just press them down so the interfacing edges are all tucked underneath. And then that's pretty much it. So this is all we're going to do with these pieces until we go to applique them onto our background squares. I don't have the background squares up on the design wall yet. I think I'm going to go ahead and applique all of my shapes and turn them out. And then we will just do all of the pinning to the background squares and appliquing of all of that at the same time. So as far as keeping all of your shapes kind of sorted and organized while you're going through however many shapes you may have for your project, I am going to make myself some labels. And I'm going to have, 0 through 10, and then 11 through 20, and then on up through, I think I have like 85 pieces for the applique for this project. So I'm going to kind of sort them and put them in groups, and then when I go to lay them out onto my tree, I'll be able to find those groups pretty quickly, because when I did the pattern for the tree, I pretty much did 1 through whatever on down the tree. So I'll be able to grab that first bundle of number 1 through 10 and pin them onto my background squares, and then progress on down with the layout of the tree. So that's what I'm going to do now. Just make myself a few labels and get these started in their little bundles. I know I have a 50 and a 70 and a 30. So that's what they're going to be sorted into. And then when I get all of my shapes together, we will do the next step for this tree. Thank you so much for joining me for this video on the ornament display Christmas tree quilt. I am really excited to get this project together and finished before Christmas. I have several months, so I feel good about that, but there's definitely a lot of work to go. So I have a lot of shapes to be sewing up, and that's what I'm going to work on now. And then as soon as I get those together, I will jump back here and show you how to start laying those out onto your background squares, how to set up your design wall if you have one, or the floor if you don't. So be looking for that within the next couple of weeks. It may take me a little bit to get all these shapes sewn and turned, so please be patient with me, but I will definitely do another video and show you the progress on my ornament display Christmas tree quilt. Until next time, I hope you find some time for yourself, and of course, happy stitching.